when one parent practices mindfulness, you have greater family happiness, better family communication, fewer accidents in the home.
You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast. Today we're talking about how to raise resilient kids with Chris Willard. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast. Here it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have, and when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clark-Field's Mindful Mama mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of the Mindful Parenting course and membership, and I'm the author of Raising Good Humans, a mindful guide to breaking the cycle of reactive parenting and raising kind, confident kids. Welcome back. I am so glad you are here today. This is such an awesome episode. In just a minute, I'm going to be sitting down with Chris Willard, and we have an awesome conversation about resilience, right? This is like the most important quality that I want for my kids during these difficult times, and maybe you too, right? And, our kids really need this capacity to overcome hard times because we can't, and we probably wouldn't want to protect them from every single one of life's difficulties anyway. So today I talk to Dr. Christopher Willard, a psychologist who has been practicing meditation for 20 years. He has led hundreds of workshops around the world with invitations to appear in 24 countries. He's presented at TEDx conferences, and his thoughts have appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, and elsewhere. He's the author of A Child's Mind, Growing Up Mindful, Raising Resilience, and 10 other books for parents, professionals, and children, available in more than a dozen languages. And he teaches at the Harvard Medical School. So he's an awesome, well-informed expert with so much to offer. And I want you to listen for some important takeaways. How the younger that your child is, the more contagious your emotions are. So, of course, that work with you cannot give what you do not have really matters, right? And that the best practice for a child in a meltdown is your mindfulness practice as a parent. And that resilient kids have both a stable, loving adult and responsibilities. So there's a lot to take in here. I'm dying for you to jump into this episode. But before we dive in, I want to let you know it's early. It's maybe August if you're listening to this in real time. But the Mindful Parenting free live training is coming around again. And this is a powerful training. People love this so much. We're going to be doing it in September 9th through 14th. But this is what we're going to be learning. We're going to talk about why your kids don't listen to you. We're going to talk about how to stop yelling, parenting during the pandemic, and then these 3 myths that keep you from being the parent you want to be. So if you want to join all that, I'll be teaching live and taking questions. We'll be doing giveaways. It's a whole fun thing. If you want to be a part of it, just go to mindfulparentingcourse.com/free training. That's mindfulparentingcourse.com/free training. And of course, you can find it at mindfulmamamentor.com too. But it's so cool, and I can't wait for you to be a part of it. It's so fun to join thousands of people and from around the world doing this work. It's so exciting. All right, enough about that. I can't wait for you to dive in. Join me at the table as I talk to Chris Willard. Chris, thanks so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. Yeah, thank you.
I'm looking forward to talking to you. And I love talking to people who are helping teach mindfulness to kids. And I think that's such a powerful thing. But I think your story has so much power in it. In that, I think it's really valuable to see that the people we see as experts have really struggled, in a lot of ways. Like for me personally, I come to mindfulness because I really needed it, but you really needed it too. So I was wondering if If maybe you could talk to us about that story about how you came to mindfulness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, I think some of us, we get into mindfulness and we start suddenly noticing like, oh, no one comes through this without no one's like, my life is going great, I'm going to add in mindfulness. It's like usually things are a challenge and then we're looking for some answers and then we find what we find, whether it's spirituality or whether it's arts or whether it's mindfulness or whether it's a combination of all of those things. And that's certainly my story. And then, yeah, I'm happy to share that. So, I mean, and I do think it's such an interesting conversation when I talk to other kind of mindfulness-y teachers, and again, kind of broadly speaking, like, what is your origin story? And I guess for me, there's sort of two parts of it. One is just being a kid and growing up in a family that was like pretty, I don't know, like not that, I don't know, normal's a pretty, questionable word in some ways, but like, just a pretty standard kind of family growing up in the suburbs in a lot of ways. And, but I had these experiences when I was a kid that I think back on. I never heard that word mindfulness, but I think about like being at day camp when I was like 7 years old and the counselor is saying, we're going to walk in the forest as silently as we can. Can you not make a sound while we walk? And then we're going to sit down and listen to all the sounds in the forest. Can you hear the trees whispering to each other?
Mm.
Right. And like, 20 years later, looking back and being like, it takes so much focus to walk without making a sound. That's a lot like this mindful walking thing I'm
Mhm.
doing right now. Or sitting and listening to all the sounds in the silence remains probably my favorite anchor of attention when I'm and all the time that I have these days, right, to go and do a 10-minute, 20-minute sit. That's usually either the full practice rather than my breath, or that's at least the kind of beginning of my practice, is just taking some time to listen to sounds. Or
Mhm.
like looking at clouds in the sky with my dad, or who knows what. So I had these experiences that were sort of mindfulness-ish, if not actually mindfulness. And then I, grew up and went to kind of like a high pressure cooker high school and off to college, um, and totally had like a complete meltdown. Um, in some circle, and I ended up taking a couple of years off. In some circles you might call that finding yourself, in other circles you might call that getting your shit together, right? Kind of like one or the other. And in that time, my parents were very caring. They'd actually just gotten interested in mindfulness, probably in retrospect because they were stressed out by me,
Oh.
and how hard a time I was having with drugs and alcohol, depression, anxiety, all these other things. I was using lots and lots of drugs, was using IV heroin, things like that. And, a couple of years of taking time off from school. And they actually basically like dragged me on this retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh. And basically my first few days of sobriety were on a retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh in
Wow.
Vermont with all these other people and being kind of sick and like trying to do this mindful walking and mindful sitting. And yet at the same time, starting to feel suddenly like some kind of spark in me had been reignited of a desire to live, of a desire to connect with other people. I mean, his emphasis is so much on interbeing, right? But seeing the ways that my behavior was impacting other people as well as impacting myself, as well as seeing that like life could actually be really wonderful and worth living when we slow down and we take a half an hour to eat that raisin, or we walk slowly, or we like gaze up at the mountains. And um, those retreats, that aren't really happening anymore, but, they had wonderful affinity groups of area, sort of geographic zip code or areas of interest. And one of the ones that they also had of areas of interest was addiction and recovery. And so I met a lot of people in that. And that really started my journey in mindfulness, which then was coinciding with my journey of recovery from addiction. I've now been sober for 19 years, and also my journey in terms of like getting back in touch with my creativity, and then like so many young people when they're converted to something, right, just wanting to share this. Right? It's like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, everyone needs to learn mindfulness. I need to teach everyone, especially young people need to learn mindfulness. They don't have to suffer as much as me. And so that kind of got things really kicked off for me, which then was not. And also I want to just say, like, there's a lot in between that day and the day today and becoming a parent, right? And a lot of, challenges in between. It's not like, I went on that retreat and then suddenly my life was amazing. It's I went on that retreat and that was day one of things moving forward in my life, and moving toward life in a really different way. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. It's cool that you were able to go with your parents. Cool that they
Yeah.
had like they had that resource somehow. They had been exposed to that. I've actually taken my daughter, I took my 6-year-old on the last retreat that Tay did in the
Oh,
United
wow.
States in
Wow.
2013.
Wow.
And
Uh-huh. Yeah.
so we were there, and we've done family retreats in that
Yeah.
tradition as well, which I think the listener, you've probably heard me talk about. But so I can really relate to, I for myself personally, I have a great image of what the walking looked like. There were probably lots of
Gosh, it's so
people, and
beautiful.
and that's kind of like a wonderful peer pressure to have, in that everybody, you're with hundreds or even thousands of other people who are like quietly walking and practicing mindfulness. And actually, like you talk about, I mean, I wanted to talk to you about this later, about how our practice can influence other people, but obviously that practice really, that was like this incredible positive peer pressure for you. I mean, that I feel like you must feel very fortunate that this sort of, because it could have gone so many
Oh
bad
my
ways.
gosh, so many bad ways. And I feel so incredibly lucky that, my parents had, that they'd already been starting this practice, that they'd had access, sort of,
Mhm.
whether it's financial access or cultural access and permission, right? All those things to be able to know about someone like Thich Nhat Hanh, or to learn about something like mindfulness, and then to have, the frame of mind to, and the courage to see whether that would go okay for me. I don't know if I would recommend people drag their, kid basically on a Thich Nhat Hanh retreat with like a, 30 seconds of sobriety, but it's somehow in my situation, I was in the right place at the right time. Also, a lot of stars had to align, or whatever you believe in, right, for that to happen. And I feel so lucky that it did. Yeah.
It's amazing to see
Yeah.
the amount of suffering that also I think that one can have, having grown up in like a relatively, your parents, when they took you on that retreat, were still together. Like, they were a relatively
Yeah.
stable, like kind of quote unquote normal household in the suburbs. If you were in the suburbs, you had some means, right? And to see like the amount of suffering you were under, as far as anxiety and depression, all those things when we get to our 20s. And there's even more now these days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't
Right.
that what all the studies say about today's kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we know about our kids today, and I'm sure you've had people on the podcast too to discuss, but like, such a, collapse in mental health, 1 in 3 teenagers having anxiety, or, mostly anxiety, but some other diagnosable mental health issue. I work a lot, I think, especially because it was that time in my life, but with college students, that's actually a project I'm just sort of undertaking, is mental health in college kids. The number of college kids like dropping out, not graduating in 4 years, all these things. But then also, not just that, but like going earlier into childhood, even at like my son's nursery school, like, there were kids with like pretty challenging, anxiety issues. And then just the consulting I do in different schools, elementary schools, high schools, colleges, preschools, but just hearing, and of course I'm hearing, that's my job. I'm a psychologist, so I hear the worst, most challenging stories. But even in the time that I've been in the profession, I've seen it change and uptick in the last decade or so. And then of course you had a pandemic on top of that, and it's a recipe for even more even more challenges. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy right now for kids, and so and for everyone, I mean, honestly. But so you sort of fast forward to the end of your story, which I think is so helpful to hear. That then Chris went on to, you're at Harvard Medical School, right? And you have a
Hmm.
psychologist and all this. So he went
Yeah.
on. Mindfulness saved your life. Woohoo!
It did. It totally 100% did. The last time I saw Thich Nhat Hanh in person, at Harvard Medical School, actually,
Mm,
at a conference. I mean, I just sat there. If you've ever heard the Avalokiteshvara,
mm.
sort of chanting that they do on the retreats, or you can find them on YouTube. But like, I was just like bawling my eyes out, because
Oh,
it was like, it's probably around 2013, actually. and maybe a little bit earlier than that, but it was like, just all that, years kind of in between, and really feeling like that his presence, his work, his community, the space that he created, and held, and continues, right, to hold for the world, is what allowed me to live, and saved my life for real. Like, absolutely, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. We are supported by Biossance. I have been using their squalane and lactic acid resurfacing night serum for the last month, and I have to say my skin has never looked better, and it feels so lovely to put on every single night. It's Biossance's best-selling serum and a top-selling serum at Sephora. You wake up to dramatically smoother, softer, luminous skin overnight. It gently exfoliates and resurfaces for smoother, softer texture, helping to eliminate daily stressors for your skin. With Biossance, their mission is to make beauty really clean. Their products are formulated without parabens, without synthetic fragrances, and over 2,000 ingredients that are potentially toxic or questionable, ensuring only the highest standards for skincare that is clean, safe, sustainable, and effective. All Biossance's products are proudly vegan, cruelty-free, and EWG verified. They use squalane, this mega moisturizing molecule. It's weightless, non-comedogenic oil that instantly hydrates while locking in essential moisture. And they save 2 million sharks every year because they make the squalane using ethically and sustainably sourced sugarcane. For years, some companies have used shark's liver. Many have since switched to olives, but crop variability and natural occurring impurities can make the end result unpredictable, both in terms of quality and availability. And Biossance uses this shelf-stable, 100% vegan squalane, and it's consistent and reliable, and it's nature's best moisturizer for the planet. I invite you to make this an essential part of your nighttime routine, gentle enough to use every night and perfectly balanced with 10% vegan lactic acid. It's powerful enough to produce dramatic results, but gentle enough for daily use, and you can feel so good about the sourcing. Go ahead to biossance.com and use the coupon code HUNTER to get 20% off your next purchase. That's biossance.com, BIOSSANCE. Use the coupon code HUNTER to get 20% off now. Yeah, I've been in those. One of my first experiences actually with Chris is in Boston. I used to live in Boston, and one of my first experiences seeing Thich Nhat Hanh live was going to Boston, being in the Boston Convention Center at some one point, and the Boston Convention Center, and like they had all the rooms opened up, so it was like this enormous space, and there were like 10,000 people there or something, like it was just a huge number of people in a single room because it's this convention center, everybody's sitting in chairs and perfectly silent. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, wow, I've never been in with this many people perfectly quiet. Right. It was, I have goosebumps, like remembering that. It was amazing. Yeah. So I think you, like me, like saw that, if we can, we can help kids, and it's wonderful to like have school interventions and things like that, but we also need to help parents in order to help kids, right? Because like if parents are really stressed out, then kids are really absorbing that, right? Like it's nice to say to your child, like, here, honey, go do this guided mindfulness meditation. But if you're like really stressed and have a lot of anxiety, like that's really do this thing while I get all stressed out. It's not going to really work so well.
I check my emails and like,
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about like kind of how we can, I guess I'd like to talk about like kids' resilience. How can we, one of your books is called Raising Resilience. So how can we help kids be more resilient? And then, but I think that I'd like to open up the conversation starting with what our own life, what our own priorities and our own practices have to do with that. Because, we talk about how, our own practice and there's research, right, that shows that our own practice
Right.
lead to more positive emotions in the people around us. So can you tell us a little more about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I get asked all the time, like, what's the best practice when my kid is having a meltdown? What's the best practice for my kid's panic attack? And the answer that it took me a while to kind of figure this out. And the answer I come back with, and I don't mean to sound flip, but the best practice, the best mindfulness practice for a kid in a meltdown or a kid in a panic attack is your practice as a parent. Right? It's like, what can you draw on that time that you spent on your cushion, or that have spent walking a bit more mindfully or eating a bit more mindfully in informal ways? Like, that's going to be the thing that helps your kid. That's going to be what saves your kid, not being like, here, read this book, or, here, go listen to this, or go do some breaths or something like that. It's going to be, can we stay well regulated? Can we stay connected while our kid is really suffering, right? Whether it's big addiction of years, or whether it's micro suffering of a panic attack about what am I going to, wear to school tomorrow. I mean, all of those things require us to be well regulated, and we can use mindfulness, and for us to stay connected and compassionate while our child is having that really difficult time. And this is because all of our emotions are contagious, and the younger our child is, the more contagious they are. So
Oh,
like,
wow.
yes, anxiety is somewhat genetic, and so is depression and all that. But also, like, as you said, right, we're really setting the tone. What kids are not doing until they're older is self-regulating. What they're doing is co-regulating with us. So like, they don't have, their brains are not developed. So we're doing that regulation for them. And then they learn how to internalize this, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a skill that they can use. So it kind of keeps over and over again coming back to us. But like, yeah, I remember when we went to the pediatrician right after my son was born, and I immediately kind of anxiously was like, what if he has anxiety? And the pediatrician said, like, I've seen a lot of anxious kids without anxious parents, but I've never seen anxious parents without an anxious kid. And I was sort of like, oh shit, got to work on part of my language, but like, got to work on my own, like, reminder of like going back to my own practice, back to my own, self-care, whatever that looks like, again, whether that's mindfulness, whether that's exercise, whether that's art, whatever it is for each of us. But for me, it's mostly around mindfulness. And then we have this amazing thing where it is contagious, that when one parent practices, the partner is happier, the co-parent is happier and is happier with the relationship. The kids are happier, family communication is better, there's fewer accidents in the home, right? All this
Wow.
really cool stuff starts to kind of trickle out from person to person.
Is
Um,
that is that research? Like, when one parent practices those? Can you repeat that? Because that's just
Yeah,
amazing.
absolutely. It's one of my favorite things. And I've been, trying to think, like, could I write a whole book on this, or maybe just, some blogs or something, but it really is. So when one parent practices mindfulness, you have greater family happiness, better family communication, fewer accidents in the home. One other thing I can't remember. When people in a partnership practice, like a couple, right? Like, if I'm practicing, then actually my wife, the research would predict that my wife would be happier with our relationship and our communication would be better. And there'd be fewer negative interactions.
Mhm.
When roommates practice, like, if like college kids, it's like the week one of the college kids is practicing mindfulness, the other roommate is happier, even if they don't know that the roommate is secretly practicing 20 minutes of mindfulness every day on their, listening to some download or something. So it
Wow.
really is, yeah, I mean, this stuff is so cool. Compassion is also contagious. Generosity is contagious, person to person to person. They've looked at this, and like, real researchers. This is not, like, University of Quackadoo. This is like, people at Emory, people at Harvard Medical School, people at Oxford. Like, this is really cool stuff. The way it starts to trickle out and affect other people. So I think about this a lot right now when, well, if our mindfulness affects the people around us, we're recording this in the middle of the pandemic. I don't know when everyone's listening, but we're spending a lot of time with 3 or 4 people right now. So our
Yes.
behavior is really having a big impact on them, right?
Yes.
And
Yes,
then
it's
maybe we
engaging.
say, go do some hot chocolate breaths, but we start with ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. It's really proving interbeing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah,
Thich
totally.
Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist master that we talked about in the beginning, talking about this, he teaches this idea of interbeing and that we inter-are. And it's such an important counter thought to all the like independence thinking that we're kind of raised with in
Hmm.
in the United States, where I'm just gonna do my thing and it doesn't, it doesn't affect anybody, but that's not true. And this research is really proving that it's not true. And we
Right.
know it's not true in all sorts of other levels too. But I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting for me to hear because it's something I've been teaching a lot. And like, but what if my partner doesn't practice? Well, now I can say for sure you can have a positive effect even if your partner doesn't practice.
Right, right. And
And
compassion, actually, like I did this little kind of like goofy talk a few years ago about how compassion is not just contagious, but it's like there's this sort of joke about karma. Like if you do good, it'll come back around. If you do bad, it'll come back around.
mhm.
And it's sort of like, well, that's not really how karma works. But in fact, actually, if you do good, like you actually can see positive behavior, like something like generosity or kindness, come back around to you. Like you can actually like look at this statistically. It's kind
Oh
of
wow.
crazy. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. And you start off your book, Raising Resilience, with a chapter about generosity, and you said
Hmm.
generosity is also contagious. And
Hmm.
um I wanted to talk to you about generosity, and I love, how it shows how research shows how generosity like makes us feel better and all those incredible ways, and I think that's amazing. And I want to teach generosity, but I also want to teach responsibility to my kids. And so I
Yeah.
get really
Right.
frustrated sometimes at that like kind of balance, that middle path between generosity and responsibility, right? Like, so for instance, my 10-year-old, like we're trying to right now teach her to remember lots of little things that she is forgetting all around the house, making a pain in the butt for us, like the cap on the toothpaste, the dishes here, left here, and all these different things left all over the place. And so what I'm saying is, honey, come back. I know I'm interrupting something, but you got to come back and take care of this because this is the natural consequence of this. And this is going to
Hmm.
help you remember to do this. And I'm sorry, I know it's a pain in the butt, but so I'm trying to teach her responsibility in that. But am I not being generous by just like helping her out a bit and modeling that? So help me go through this conundrum that I have personally.
I think this is so hard, and it's in some ways it comes back again to mindfulness, which teaches us, right, two things arise out of mindfulness: wisdom and compassion. And wisdom we can also think of as like discernment and knowing how to read situations and make good decisions and act accordingly to what's really going on. And so I think mindfulness really helps us. But one of the things I think I present, maybe it's even later in that book, but is sort of like these are hard questions. Like as a parent, what's generosity and what's spoiling,
Hmm.
right? Or what's or what's, maybe in the case of my parents when I was 20 years old, what's generosity and what's enabling, right? And then there, on the flip side of that, there's also this sort of razor's edge between like what's generosity and what's obligation, right? Like, well, of course I'm gonna
Mm.
put dinner on the table for my kids. Like, is that an act of generosity, or is that just like what I should do as a parent? And I think these are just, to me, in many ways, these are moving targets. These are always changing, right? And what's like the bigger generosity? Like, is the bigger generosity sweeping up for my kid? Is the bigger generosity yelling at my kid to clean up, or is it cleaning up with them and teaching them how to clean up? Because then there's sort of like the teach the man to fish kind of thing, and like then the bigger gift is in fact independence, right? Or maybe interdependence, as we'd say,
Mm.
because it came out of this relationship that we had with them. And I think the thing as parents to remember is like, we're never going to get it right. We're certainly not going to get it right all the time, right? We're just always aiming to get it a little bit more right than we did yesterday because the kid's going to be different today and the mess is going to look different today and we're going to be in a different mood, or we're going to have to get out the door faster that day or not as fast that day. And so being in many ways also generous with ourselves, with like, okay, the generous thing to do today is to not get into the power struggle. That's the generous thing to do to myself, right? Or maybe the generous thing to do is to is to like take the time to really talk out, this is why you've got to pick up your toys or your Legos or your art supplies or dishes or whatever it might be. um and Yeah. But, and I hope that doesn't sound like a dodge, but
No,
I do
no.
think it's more like, it's not like it's dependent on every person, but it is like,
Mm,
it's about our wisdom. It's about
mhm,
how much we're in touch with the present moment, which mindfulness will cultivate. That's what then allows us to respond from what's happening in the present moment, not what happened yesterday when
mhm.
we were so pissed and we yelled at the kid, or or we were so pissed and we didn't yell at the kid, but now we're resentful today, so we do yell at the kid, right? We're responding from the present, not from the conditioning the child has done, our own childhood conditioning. Someone asked me recently how I think of mindful parenting, and I think of it as like parenting from the present. But what does that really mean? It's not reacting. It's not parenting out of reaction to our own childhood, and it's not replicating the way our parents parented us. But it's weighing both of those and then kind of like acting with what's happening in the moment. And the more in touch we are with the moment and attuned we are to our child, right, the more we'll be able to say, today's the day I'm going to just pick up their damn dishes. Or today's the day I'm going to say, let's pick up the dishes together and here's why. Or I'm going to pick up the dishes and then have a conversation later, right? I think that's
Mm.
where mindfulness can help us. And again, it's not a magic bullet. You're not going to get it right every time, but you'll also learn how to forgive yourself when you don't get it right. And that, I think, is such an important part of parenting.
Yeah, and that compassion is contagious, you know, and
Hmm.
I teach a lot that like we have to practice that for ourselves. Like we have to like turn around that inner voice to be from a harsh voice to a self-compassionate voice, because
Right.
eventually that voice is coming out. You're not going to
Right.
hide it
Right.
forever. You know,
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and so that's really contagious. Well, you're helping me think about the generosity responsibility conundrum that I'm in, and you write in your book how there's like the three types of generosity: material, comfort, and wisdom. And you know, even if I'm not maybe making being like sort of materially generous in those moments, maybe I can be like offer some wisdom generosity instead, you know, and but just I love that reminder to just, you know, don't make it a blanket rule. You know, just
Right.
be
Right.
be present with what's happening in that moment. Um,
Right.
talking about sort of like the ultimate present person. I love how in Raising Resilience you talk about how even the Buddha had helicopter parents. And I had never
Yeah, he
thought of
did.
I've known the story of the Buddha for a long time, and I never had never it's true. He did have helicopter parents. So I would love it if you could sort of tell that story a little bit about the Buddha and his helicopter parents, and sort of the what happened with that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fun. I did that book a couple of years ago, and I don't revisit it often, but it's always such a treat when I do, because I actually really enjoyed writing it. And it's about Buddhist principles in the modern world, and so it's trying to draw on the 10 paramis and then looking at them like, what does this look like in the modern world? How do we apply this to parenting? And it's sort of like the Buddha was able to pass the marshmallow test, and then talking also about the Buddha had helicopter parents, and he did, like he lived in a gated community, for lack of a better word, right? He lived within the castle walls. He never went out, right? He only had, pleasure and joy and, creature comforts and all the best food, and, never saw any suffering in the real world because he never left his little bubble, right? Which is, the experience of, me for much of my childhood, and, probably some other listeners and some other parents. Right. And then one day, basically his servant, who, we could translate in the modern world as, his nanny, like went back to his neighborhood or her neighborhood, and suddenly he saw suffering, just as like a really privileged kid might, run an errand with their nanny and suddenly be like, wait a minute, this neighborhood looks different. And, that kind of thing. And then what happened when he saw that suffering is he wanted to know where it came from and what people could do about it. He saw sickness, old age, and death. And it is one of those things about, it's not like we need to throw our kids into suffering, but they do need to, know that the world is a challenging place, is a place that does have suffering in it. We need to expose them to that in developmentally, emotionally appropriate ways. But that, what happened for him when he saw that, is that he then, went on this mission to figure out how to alleviate that suffering in the world. And in some ways, that's like, I kind of, reflect that as sort of like, kid goes off to college and suddenly, starts to get politically active, or, goes on a trip abroad or something, a privileged kid, and suddenly, becomes interested in alleviating poverty or medicine or something like that. And it's not that different. We just, for many of us, it just sounds so different that the Buddha did all this, or, that he had these, kings and queens as parents, when in fact, it's really the same story of just a privileged kid with helicopter parents in the gated community. And it's only once our kids start to get exposed to the world and the challenges of the world that they can start to grow. But then again, the middle path is, we're not going to throw our kids into the horrors of the world when they're 4 years old. We're going to slowly, through storytelling, through sharing from our own experience, through talking about history, right, start to share with them, what the world is like in ways that they can process and make meaning out of, and have it transform not into cynicism and anger and hopelessness, but share these things with them so that it turns into a drive for compassion and a desire and a drive to alleviate that suffering, right? That's what we're really trying to do. Because we all know when we're sick, when we're suffering, it can turn into anger and bitterness, or it can turn into, how can I alleviate this suffering in other people, right? And that's certainly what I hope for with my kid, right? Raising good kids, right? Raising good adults, right? Like you talk about, right? So it's that same thing.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. We are supported by KiwiCo. As parents, we may feel like our kids' summer vacation started way too early if we've been at home together, and now actual summer vacation is here. Well, learning at home really doesn't have to stop for the summer. In fact, here's a really fun way to learn at home. Believe it or not, a lot of kids are missing school right now, and they want to have that learning. And if we listen close, we know that kids could be learning at home. Well, I love this sponsor, KiwiCo. My daughter did a walking robot. She has the Tinker Crate, and she did the walking robot. I loved how she did it all herself. She made this actual robot that walked around, and it was so cute. She loved the building part. For her, the building part was the most fun. With KiwiCo, they have all kinds of different crates for all kinds of different ages and stages and interests. And your child can get these super cool hands-on science and art projects delivered at your door every single month. And what kid doesn't love to get mail? You'll be surprised at how high quality the materials are. These are real engineering, science, and art projects for children. As a parent, it's hard to find creative and new things to keep your children busy and challenged, especially during this crazy long days of COVID summer, right? And KiwiCo does the legwork for you so you can spend quality time tackling projects together at home. KiwiCo is redefining play with hands-on projects that build confidence, creativity, and critical thinking skills. There's something for every kid or kid at heart at KiwiCo. You can get your first month free on select crates at kiwico.com/hunter. That's KIWICO.com/hunter. Yeah, it's interesting that you in that chapter you point out that many of us who may be in this sort of time of, maybe we're sort of coming out of that time of helicopter parenting, but we were children of parents
Now
who
we're all stuck in a
underparented.
helicopter together.
Yeah, we are all stuck together. But, we were children of parents who underparented, who are, my dad jokes about it. He's like, yeah, I parented you through benign neglect and, you're fine kind of thing. And I hadn't really thought about that, like that sort of that underparenting has maybe led to this overcorrection. And would you say that, so thinking back to your own childhood, what kind of parenting were you raised with?
Yeah, I think my parents were unfortunately cutting edge in some ways. I think, so my mom was a psychologist also, and she studied child development. Actually, she was going to be a teacher. I think she wanted to be a principal. Went to graduate school for that to get her doctorate, and then started getting more and more interested in mental health, and ended up kind of going on a clinical track in psychology. so she was kind of exposed to all these early ideas about, this is the late 70s, early 80s, about, kind of self-esteem and, all those kinds of things, that we are now correcting also, right? With like, sort of the growth mindset movement and, that kind of thing. And so I actually kind of think I was like, in many ways, more sheltered than a lot of my friends, more kind of like, I don't like to say coddled, but like about myself, but I do think I kind of was in some ways, in the way that there's maybe these stereotypes about millennials now, that like this sort of everybody gets a trophy and everybody's great. And now these kids all have no, again, like I don't subscribe to that whole cloth by any means, but that was a little bit of who I was. Like I had no clue how to manage the real world. And as soon as things got hard and my parents weren't around, I completely fell apart. That's what happened for me in college. It was like, wait a minute, my parents aren't helping with it. Like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to like organize my own calendar or whatever. And like the wheels just totally came off once I had a little taste of freedom. And so then, and they did fall off, and then I was in really rough shape. And then, I started to realize like, I want to feel more independent and interdependent rather than dependent. And I think actually, to go back to Thich Nhat Hanh, right? What's the difference between interdependence and dependence, right? I was dependent. I learned how to become interdependent. Right? That's sort of what the journey of my early 20s was. And feeling like I could do things for myself and then feel actually good about myself because I was doing things that made me feel good or not feel good. That's really where self-esteem comes from, is, as I heard someone say once, doing esteemable things, like, by paying my own bills, by, I spend a lot of time doing jobs like construction, where it's like, if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. You don't get a trophy. It's like, you broke that thing. Like, what's the matter with you? Now you have to pay for it. Like that kind of thing actually was really important for some of my personal development or learning how to do other things on my own and not in a dependent way. So what would I say about my parenting? But they were, that's sort of the less, generous side maybe toward my parents, but they were also incredibly loving. And it's hard to fault people for being like too loving and a little too compassionate or too giving you too much of a cushion, right? But they were incredibly loving. I think it's in the book actually. They went to a therapist when I was having a hard time, who said, and stuck with me, but the number one rule of parenting is never give up. And man, am I glad they never gave up. And it's one that I think of often myself. It's one that I, then, share in workshops and share when I talk to parents as a therapist. And they never gave up on me. And that I think, is so important. And they loved me and they supported me, even when I was having such an incredibly difficult time. And I think they, figured out how to set like better limits, and I learned how to accept better limits. And I think that then made our relationship actually so much more meaningful and closer. Like then after that, it became close in a much more sort of adult to adult way through my 20s and 30s and now into my 40s. So that's been really important. And that also came out of doing a lot of, wonderful family things together, family trips, whether it was, like a kind of fancier trip or whether it was something like just, after my senior year of high school, we did like a week-long backcountry backpacking trip in the Tetons in Wyoming as a family, which was really cool in retrospect. It's like, that was awesome that they did that with us, and a lot of things like that I think really brought us closer in good ways. Not just sort of that like comfortable close, but that close in ways that are also challenging. And I don't know if I'm articulating myself as well as I want to, but those things were so special, and they instilled really good values in me. I think we all think we have good values, right? But I do feel like, I really learned how to be generous, how to be kind, how to be caring. I feel lucky. I don't carry a lot of resentment toward them at all. And I feel really grateful for that. And they've been supportive to me over my adulthood too, and have made wonderful grandparents for my own two children.
So
I feel
beautiful.
so lucky. Yeah.
I love hearing, you know, this sort of like honest recollection of this was a problem and this incredible strengths that came through as well, you know, like these incredible loving strengths. But it sounds like you could really relate to a lot of the generation of college kids who are really struggle with getting overwhelmed, and because
Mhm.
the, you know, the things have been sort of snowplowed out of the way for them, to use another kind of metaphor for that. But so let's talk a little bit then about, you know, how do we help kids prepare for the world? How do we help them with that, you know, that resilience? How do we help them get that resilience? I mean, I mean, maybe especially now in this crazy
Yeah.
pandemic time.
Yeah. I think giving kids something, during the pandemic, I, suddenly got asked to do all these talks on resilience and was kind of going back over my notes. But I think, I think giving kids independence and interdependence. And, one of the things I've been saying is, if you look at the research on kids that have been through what we might call ACEs, adverse childhood events, which are basically small and large traumas, whether it's facing discrimination, whether it's mental illness in the family, addiction, violence in your neighborhood, right? All these kinds of things that add up and, and often, are correlated with problems down the road. You look at some of these kids who have all these high ACE scores and they are fine. And you ask questions of them and you find out two things. One is that all those kids who turned out okay, who turned out resilient, had one adult in their life who was stable and supportive and loving,
Mm.
and consistent and compassionate. And maybe that's a parent, or maybe that's a teacher, or maybe that's somebody else. And the other thing is that they often said that they, like when you ask them what were meaningful recollections from childhood, they'll say that they were given responsibility. They were asked to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And whether that's a
Mm.
spiritual thing, or whether that's a, movement of some kind, or whether that's, just doing service work of some kind. And I don't want the takeaway to be like, Dr. Willard said, like, do your dishes if you want to be resilient. It's like, yeah, great. Do the dishes, that'd be great. But really, like, I think about during this time, like, how can I get my kids who are pretty young, but like, you know, can they be making signs, for marches? Can we be making the neighborhood more fun by writing in chalk around the neighborhood? Can we be dropping off food at neighbors' houses? Right? Can older kids be tutoring younger kids online who we know are falling behind, right, in online school situations? Can kids be, so many older people can't get visitors at the retirement community? Can kids be making artwork and sending it over there, or putting on concerts in their home and getting them played in the hospitals, right? These kinds of things are ways that we can be, to me anyway, like we can all become part of something bigger. We can all, I think we all agree, everyone in North America, or at least in the US who's listening, right, that like our society is getting not even more polarized, just more kind of like atomized almost, and all these sort of smaller, groups that are afraid of each other. This can actually really rebuild connections. If the older kid's tutoring the younger kid, it's like, then those two families feel more trust and connection. If the kids are, if the people at the retirement community are reading to the 5-year-olds, and the 5-year-olds are sending artwork back to hang up on the walls, that's strengthening those community bonds, right? So we're becoming more resilient as individuals when we do things like service work. And we're also making more resilient communities and a more resilient society for ourselves if we do this kind of thing. And we're giving our kids something to do besides just watch more screens, which I think is also all of us parents are desperate to figure out. So
OMG. I love this though, because it kind of points back to like what we were saying in the beginning. You know, it's like we parents are kind of selfishly in some ways thinking like, oh, I want my kid to be resilient. You know, I want them to be resilient. And that what you're pointing to as part of the answer is like this collective answer. Like let's teach our kids to care for more than themselves. Let's teach our kids to care for others and to act on that, and to have it be more than entertainment, you know.
right, right.
And it's a little hard though, because parents are so stressed out, we're working so
Yeah,
much, like it takes sort
extremely.
of
Yeah,
creativity and
right, right.
time and
Energy,
challenge to like
sleep,
organize
food.
any of those things
Right,
you talked about,
right,
you know,
right.
too.
Absolutely.
So it's in some ways, it's a big ask as well.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
little hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. And I think, I also just want to, really put that out there. None of this is easy. And, and everyone's in such a different place in terms of what kind of literal time or finances or bandwidth, even in terms of their stress or, abilities they might have to kind of help facilitate these things to happen. That I'm not just like, yeah, everyone go do a giant art project and bring it down to the retire. It's like, I know it's a lot more than that, but it's also, as the conversation, turns to like, what can schools look like? It's like learning is, learning math and reading is going to be hard, but maybe there are some other skills that we can be thinking about that educators can be facilitating in our kids, and connections and, social emotional learning that's not like a curriculum, but is like, yeah, we're just connecting with other people. And that's actually going to be one of the best things we can all do for our mental health. And put away the grade books for a little bit, and the homework assignments and worksheets. That might also be another way of kind of re-envisioning this time, depending, again, on what ends up happening. But that's a way of re-envisioning, the other adults in a child's life, to help facilitate those things, right? Because of course, so many parents, not to mention so many teachers, right, but are so stretched, so thin right now.
Yeah, it was interesting that my kid's school put out a survey and I had to answer like, what is the highest priority for my child? Like, is it like get their grades? Is their mental, emotional well-being? Is it their physical safety? And I had to choose. It was like, well, this is this is interesting, like,
Yeah.
I wonder what the other answers are like.
Right. Let's see that survey results.
Yeah. Well, Chris, this is awesome. I really enjoyed talking to you. I could probably talk to you a lot more, but you have so many other resources. Your Raising Resilience book is lovely, but you also have books for kids. Do you want to tell the listener a little bit about, you have the book Alpha Breaths. You want to share a little bit about that resource?
Yeah, I mean, I feel so lucky because I get to write books for grownups. I write books for therapists and professionals, and in the last few years started writing books for kids. And I always wanted to be a writer when I grew up, and now I do. I get to do that, and it doesn't pay the bills. Just if anyone's trying to be a writer, just so you know. But it's so much fun. Yeah, I mean, so with kids, Alpha Breaths came out of a conversation I had with Daniel Richthofen, who's a wonderful mindfulness educator. And I have kind of run in similar circles for a while. And it's basically it's a very silly book. I don't even know how technically mindful it is, but it's about breathing. And it's just an alphabet book. So it starts with like, A is for the alligator breath, and B is for the butterfly breath, and C is the hot chocolate breath. And it's fun. The illustrations came out really well. It's just very silly, and kids really get into it because then parents and kids can make up their own breaths, or do one a day, or do a couple before bedtime, or teachers are using it in classrooms. And so it was just so much fun to put together. And I just found out about a week ago that they're gonna sign a sequel for it. So we're gonna have more Alpha Breaths coming in 2021. And then last year, I also got to write a book with my wife called The Breathing Book. That's just for little kids, also a picture book. And it's just kind of silly. Using the book, actually, it's more kind of Thich Nhat Hanh inspired. It's really using the book as the object of mindfulness. So it's like, how does the book feel in your hands? Like, what's its weight? What's its shape? How does it smell? Like, can you imagine the tree that it came from? What's the sound of turning page 5 compared to turning page 12? Like, kind of turn the page with your breath by like blowing on the page. So it's like, it's just kind of fun stuff like that. And that actually has it's not an exact sequel, but there's a little bit of a series that's going to be, that I also just found out. So you're hitting me on a good day where I got this good news about some more books coming too, in addition to these ones that I've done.
Yay for good news in the world. Yeah, the breathing book sounds really great. It reminds me of this. We have some cool book about this dots, and you like,
oh yeah, press here.
Press here is awesome.
It's totally awesome. I mean, it's sort of like a mindfulness ripoff of Press Here, like full disclosure. Like, if like, because my wife and I are reading Press Here, like, could you do like a mindfulness version of this? And then like, that's how the idea got started. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, yeah. All right. Well, look, if your kids like pressier, which if you don't have pressier, you have to get pressier. It's so fun. And the breathing book is so good. I love this idea. Like I want to blow the pages. That sounds really fun. Well, Chris, it's been awesome to talk to you.
This has
Is
been
there
so much fun.
anything that we didn't talk about that you think is important to talk about or mention, or any last words that you have for the listener?
Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. Thank you. And it's also so great to meet you. I've seen your name over the years. And then to, actually have this conversation has been, yeah, just such a treat for me. So thank you. And if any of your listeners are interested, just feel free to check out my website, or, I also, I'm on social media where I actually do a daily challenge on Instagram of like one little mindfulness prompt every day with different themes for each month. So if people want to check that out, they're welcome to.
Oh, cool. What's your Instagram handle?
Oh, it's at Dr. Chris Willard, like Dr. Chris Willard. Yeah.
No dot.
No dot. Yeah.
Okay. We got to know these details.
Right now it's important.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris. I love your work, and it's been a real pleasure to talk.
Likewise. It's an honor. Thank you.
Chris is pretty awesome, right? I love what he has to say about resilience. Yes, and that always comes down to us, right? Like our emotions are contagious, and our practice of mindfulness is so, so important so that we can be there. Our kids are going to have hard times. We're going to have hard times, so we need to develop those tools to weather these hard times. It's so, so vital. It's just an important life skill. That's one of the pillars of all the work I do with mindful parenting. I recently put together the mindful parenting framework in a visual. I'm going to share it with you at some point, but it's, picture these sort of 3 overlapping circles, kind of Venn diagram style. And I really see this as like that mindfulness piece is so, so important. It's one of those circles. And then self-compassion is the other one that's overlapping. Those 2 pieces are so, so important. And then, wow, when you overlap skillful communication with those 3, that is when some amazing magic happens. And that's what all the work I do around mindful parenting and my coaching groups has to do with. And just a quick reminder, you can join the free training that's going to start in early September. It's coming around sooner than you know. So go to mindfulparentingcourse.com/free training to be a part of it. That's mindfulparentingcourse.com/free training. And it's such a great idea to like get together a group of friends and do it together. You guys hold each other accountable. You can talk about it. It's really makes it so you get so much more out of it. Thus your family gets so much more out of it. And it really magnifies the impact. So I invite you to do that. Send them to mindfulparentingcourse.com/free training. And I can't wait to talk to you and see you there. And thank you so much for listening. I hope this has been helpful for you. It's so helpful for me. I feel so, so blessed and lucky to be able to not only have this relationship with you, my listener. I love like hearing all the feedback, but just like it's so cool to be able to talk to all these amazing people and bring them to you. I feel really blessed and lucky to be able to do this work. And I hope it's benefiting you. I hope it's benefiting your family. And I'm wishing you lots of peace this week. And I will be back at you next week. We have some amazing podcasts coming up. Next week, we're going to be talking about how to heal generational trauma. Really, really powerful stuff. I've been talking about that conversation with so many of my friends. So I'm so excited to share it with you. Yeah, that's coming up next week. And in the meantime, I hope you can take some of these pieces with you from today, from listening. Hope you can restart that mindfulness practice that you may have forgotten, or to just maybe try it anew. It's so many benefits and like zero zero side effects, right? Negative side effects. It's pretty awesome. So don't be afraid. We can do it. We can sit quietly by ourselves and learn to get to know ourselves, and the benefits are so awesome. All right, wishing you that this week. I'll be practicing with you. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your presence. Have a great week, my friend. Namaste.